designed special microscope components that would allow him to see these particles, which he entitled somatids, meaning the body that creates. Through experimentation, Professor Nasons found that these somatids contain genetic material yet to be fully understood by the scientific community. They are polymorphic in nature, growing from stage to stage, and are unaffected by high temperatures, extremely toxic chemicals, or even nuclear radiation. Professor Nasons believes these somatids to be subcellular living and reproducing entities, the precursor of DNA, and that they may be the building blocks of life. About 6 years ago, I learned about these particles as a result of some research that I was conducting, which was totally non-related to archaeology. At that time, I was using a standard medical microscope, and while I could not see these particles, I knew they had to be there. I began to develop my own microscope patterned after the design of Professor Nasons. What you see behind me is that microscope in its latest stage of development. The microscope employs an extremely bright xenon or mercury light source, which can be combined with tungsten light. The light is directed across the microscopic specimen rather than on or through it in what is known as a dark field configuration. The light reflecting off the object is transmitted through the microscope and is magnified over 1,000 times. The image is then captured by a sensitive CCD camera and transmitted to a monitor for viewing at screen magnifications of up to 30,000x. Under these conditions, the tiny living particles can plainly be seen against a dark background. In 1996, my family and I made a trip to Nashville to visit the Wyatts. I brought along the microscope, which at that time was somewhat portable in its early stage of development, and set it up in the basement of the Wyatts' house. One evening, Mary Nell Wyatt asked me to take a look at some material from a burial cave to see if these tiny particles were present. Without my knowledge, one of the samples was actually the blood sample that Ron had taken from the Ark of the Covenant dig. The sample was placed under the microscope, and as the specimen began to come into focus, thousands of tiny particles, somatids if you will, became plainly visible. At that time, Mary Nell, who was standing behind me, began to weep. As I turned around and saw the expression on her face, I realized immediately that the sample we were looking at was actually the sample that Ron had found to be the blood of Christ. Okay, Mary Nell's going to take the sample and mix it with sterile water. And a test tube there that we've that'll be enough. And she's going to take some sterile water and a little bit, just some drops, all we need, Mary Nell. Okay, so now that we've got the sample on the slide, we'll go ahead and focus into the sample and see what comes up on the screen here. There they are, thousands of living particles, less than 1/4 of a micron in size. The spores are maybe a 1/2 micron, and but most of those little particles you're looking at is 17,000x, magnified on the screen 17,000 times. You know, in the Bible it tells us that the life is in the blood, and there's little living particles that most people are unaware that are there. And this is the same thing we see in living blood. The scientist in Canada says that these things never die. The blood may dry up, but these things, he says, they're indestructible, and he says they are the basis of life.
blood of his son on the mercy seat at the Ark of the Covenant. Now the mechanics of that, how it happened, is in Matthew chapter 27, verses 50 through 53. It says, when he had cried again, he died. The veil of the temple was rent in twain from top to bottom. Then the earth shook and the rocks were rent and the graves were opened. When the rocks rent, the cliff behind where Christ was being crucified split all the way down, right past the left side of the cross hole and down into the chamber where God had hidden the Ark of the Covenant some 600 years before. And when the centurions pierced Christ's spleen and probably the left ventricle of the heart, depending on how deep the thrust went, the blood and the platelets and serum gushed out and went down through that crack onto the Ark of the Covenant, 20 feet below, and fulfilled, ratified, if you please, the old and the new covenant. And at that moment, you and I were bought with a price, as was everyone else on this planet, if they will only take advantage of what was done for them. What Christ did was enough to redeem every man, woman, and child that has ever been born on planet Earth. The tragedy is that so few avail themselves of that wonderful gift. Now, the next morning, and this is in Matthew chapter 28, it says, the angel descended to roll back the stone, and there was a great earthquake. I believe that God closed the crack at that point in time because there's no evidence of any surface water, rain, or dirt, dust, anything else having fallen through that crack other than just the blood of Jesus. And there it remained for almost 2,000 years. But the ark was sitting there 600 years before the blood actually went on it. The chamber where I found the Ark of the Covenant has since been perfectly cleaned out. And the Ark of the Covenant, the table of showbread, the candlestick, the golden altar of incense, they are all set out as they were in the earthly temple, except that the Ark of the Covenant is setting against the 12-foot long and 18-foot wide or high.
Yes, the tables of stone were found in the Ark of the Covenant. I removed them with the assistance of 4 angels who lifted the mercy seat, which I would estimate weighs about 900 pounds of solid gold. And one of these angels told me to take the tables of stone out of there. He said God wants everyone to see those. And so I took them out, backed up, stood there, frozen in place, and I just can't describe my physical state or mental state or anything else. If I didn't have some physical evidence to prove it happened, I think I had a dream or something. But anyway, they're on a stone ledge right in the same chamber. That's where the angel put them after I handed them to him. I didn't know what to do with them. And I was told that these are to be presented with the blood evidence when the mark of the beast law is passed or enforced. Now, I know everybody wonders about what it is, the mark of the beast. You've heard all kinds of rumors, stories, and all of this. I'll tell you quick and simple. If you keep the 10 Commandments that God wrote upon those tables of stone, and about which he says in Psalms 89:34, those of you that are writing down text, you'll want this one. He says, my covenant will I not break, nor alter the thing that has gone out of my lips. He spoke the 10 Commandments from the mountaintop. He wrote them in stone, and he says, nothing will change. Right? If you keep that law, you will receive the seal of God. Soon there will be a set of man-made laws. These man-made laws will require that you break God's Ten Commandments. Christ said of the Pharisees, "For it is in vain that they do worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men." If you keep those man-made laws and break God's Ten Commandments, you will receive the mark of the beast. When I get to heaven, I'm going to look around, and I want to see every one of you there. You can make it with God's help. Please, don't let all that go to waste. Please, take advantage of that wonderful opportunity.